My name is Luka Cekic. I'm a project assistant at the IIP, and we will be doing an interview about Zoran Djindjic, which we will commemorate, we will commemorate his assassination date back in 2003 on 12th of March. My interview partner will be Vuk Velebit. He is a part of our Young Generations Western Balkans Initiativ group, and he holds a master's degree in international security with his thesis analyzing how a pro-Russian narrative is being created in Serbia daily media. He is an independent political analyst specializing in the relations between Serbia, the EU, and Russia. He has a broad background in Serbian civic activism, and he writes and comments for several media outlets. Especially to mention here, he was a part of the protests in Belgrade, the civic movement protests, and especially also his memorable speech at the Saša Janković meeting in Belgrade several years ago. As mentioned, we will talk about Zoran Djindjic. Let's say that he was the first democratic elected Prime Minister of Serbia after Slobodan Milošević fell back on October 5th, 2000. A little bit about Zoran Djindjic. He was born on the August 1st back in 1952 in Bosanski Šamac. He graduated from Belgrade University's philosophy faculty in 1974, spent a period between 1977 and 1990 in Germany at a number of universities and social science institutions in Constance, Bonn, and Frankfurt, which leads us also that Zoran Djindjic spoke really good German and also gave much interviews in German media. He received his doctorate at the University of Constance in 1979, where he worked as an assistant lecturer. He was also one of the founders of the Democratic Party in Serbia, and he was elected mayor of Belgrade on the 21st February in 1997. He became the Prime Minister of Serbia on the 25th of January 2000 after the victory of the opposition in the Serbian parliamentary elections in December 2000. So, to you, Vuk. I would say that the first question would be to analyze a bit how Zoran Djindjic impacted Serbia's path towards establishing a democracy in the state.
I would say that the answer to your question is pretty easy and straightforward. If you look at Djindjic's political activism before coming to power, if you look those 10 years, I would say that he, together with all the members of Serbian opposition in that time, sacrificed basically 10 years of their life for the future and prosperity of our country. I think that he impacted, that he made basically a big impact on the path towards democracy, because the whole process of those 10 years, all the elections you had under Milošević rule, and those elections were not fair, were not free. Media repression was enormously strong against Serbian opposition in that time. And in all those, when you have all that context in mind, and when you know that in spite of all those irregularities, Serbian opposition led by Djindjic and later for the elections by Koštunica basically won. And I think that is the best answer how impactful they were when in those conditions they succeeded in their mission to change the power, to put Milošević in jail, to prosecute all criminals and all people around Milošević and his family. And I really think that not only that impact was great when we speak about establishing or strengthening the path towards democracy, but there is one more important thing I would say. That was maybe, I would not say the only time, but maybe the last time when people believed in someone, when people had a hope that something better would come after Milosevic. When people trusted those politicians, today in Serbia, people elect the government as usually, but people do not trust politicians as they trusted before, and especially when we talk about opposition. I would stop now here because I'm going to some other parts, but yeah, I'm happy to hear your next questions.
But it's interesting how we always connect when we talk about Zoran Djindjic or several things which happened in the past and in the history of our country, how we always tend to connect and to compare to this, what is happening today, which could maybe also say that, did we develop as a society? Did we develop as a country? Did we move forward, or are we still staying in the point in history? What would you say?
You know what Djindjic said in 2002, speaking about future developments in Serbia, and in that time he was already getting like death threats, and he was maybe aware of not what exactly is going to happen, but that his life is at stake. He said, I just don't want to see Serbia in 10 years or in 20 years staying at the same point, and to have some other government speaking about Serbian path towards European Union, Serbian path towards democracy. And unfortunately, that is exactly what is happening now and what is happening for the last 18 years. I really believe that the day when Djindjic was killed, basically the whole idea of establishing modern, civilized, prosperous and democratic society was killed as well. And that hope for a change and dream that people had before Djindjic came to power and when he was in power, I think that all disappeared all of the sudden when he was killed. So I would say that his impact was great, and that we can, even though it has passed 18 years, but I think that today we can still see that impact when people talk about those times, when people talk about how great leader Djindjic was. On the other side, I have to tell you that when Djindjic was in power, he had a support of 5 to 10% among Serbian citizens. So after he was killed, his support was like almost 100%. But that is like a separate story, which also tells that we acknowledge someone and that we respect someone when someone is killed or when someone is not with us anymore.
We can take as an example the latest news, which all shocked us in the region, with Balašević gone. He was one of the, for the viewers, he was one of the most popular authors of songs in back in Yugoslavia and also in Serbia, and also someone who really openly protested against the dictatorship, as one could say, of Slobodan Milosevic, and also afterwards, after Djindjic's death, also protested against several people and several governments, which one of them being also the one which we have now in power. I would like to quote something that you wrote you wrote an article for the European Western Balkans website, and the quote is as following: "However, the assassination of Zoran Djindjic and the arrival of the new government led by Koštunica slowed down the process of reforms. The government headed by Koštunica changed its ideology agenda, having approached the right-wing national pole, which gradually led to siding with Russia." This is what you wrote, I think 3 years ago. And how do you look at your statement, like basically your quote today, in comparison, of course, with Djindjic's agenda and Djindjic's ideas and values that he had, and with, let's say, the values and ideas and the agenda of today's government, which Serbia has?
I would say that they look the same way, like as I wrote several years ago, but I would give you just an explanation for that. Not only after Djindjic was killed, we had Koštunica, who wanted basically to keep the same forces and the same people from the past, from Milosevic regime. That was not happening only after Djindjic was killed. That was happening whole time while Djindjic and Koštunica existed together in power, when Koštunica was president and Djindjic was prime minister. And there were like several occasions which led and which prepared assassination of Djindjic. And if we have to speak about maybe not political responsibility or political motives, but about the whole climate that was prepared before Djindjic was killed, I think that Koštunica took part in that as well. I'm not accusing anyone, I'm not accusing Koštunica nor anyone else by their name that it's their responsibility, but the way they treated Djindjic, the way they were against him in the public, but in a very bad manner, the way in which Koštunica usually opposed some of Djindjic pro-reformistic decisions or moves that he wanted to make. And of course, Koštunica had very close ties with secret services, with the military, and all those people who were in power in those structures were basically the same people who were in power when Milosevic, in Milosevic's time. So I think that even after the 5th of October revolution, that government, the new government, didn't make any kind of they basically just kept all those bad people they fight against before. And of course, when you have to come to power in Serbia, I would say that you have to make a lot of compromises. And that is something that was happening in that time for sure. But of course, if you, by your own will, protect guys from secret services, and those guys were killing during the 90s, both here in Serbia and in the region. If you keep them, you send very clear signal, not only to your colleagues who are with you in power, but also to the citizens, that you basically don't want to make any radical changes. And that is the crossroad where Djindjic and Koštunica met. Djindjic wanted reforms. Djindjic wanted to put all those people from secret services and military structures out, to change them. He started doing that, but he didn't have support. But in the same time, you had like still very strong mafia, Zemunski clan, their close ties with people around Koštunica, and all that atmosphere basically led to Djindjic's assassination, and it made it possible to happen. Especially if you have in mind that Djindjic's support was very low among citizens in that time. So those are some aspects of the story to understand why I think that not only after Djindjic assassination, Koštunica took over like the way Serbia will go, but it was happening even before Djindjic was killed.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. One question of mine would be, especially regarding, we will now get a bit off topic, just for a second, if you don't have anything against it. Regarding your master thesis, which did analyze the Russian impact in Serbia and the Russian influence in Serbia, as we started talking about Koštunica also introducing this again, because we can say that in time of Slobodan Milošević, there was a Russian influence in Yugoslavia and in Serbia especially. We see a continuation also during the period where Koštunica left the power and where Boris Tadić was president. How do you analyze this? Because we tend to forget that Boris Tadić was also president. He was back also president of the Democratic Party. He was one of Djindjic's friends and loyal people in the party, as many who left then the party after Djindjic's death, and especially after Tadić lost the elections in 2012. But how do you see this? Is there a change in when the Democratic Party established like, how do you say, a majority in Serbia, and when they ruled, when Koštunica was out of business?
Yeah, I would say that there were changes. I mean, it's a very complex story to put it here, like in our short interview. But the context was different, and there were very hot problems that government and Tadić had to deal with. You had Kosovo independence happening in 2008. You had Hague Tribunal and arresting people accused for war crimes in Serbia. You had very strong extreme right nationalistic forces. So all that together was very, and also economic crisis, not to forget. So I would say that that context basically gives you the makes you to have a bit different opinion, like that it was not easy to make some radical changes in regards to regime led by Koštunica, but I think that there were some improvements, and especially if you compare today's government and the whole atmosphere in Serbian society to back in 2008 or 2010, it's completely different. I would say that back in the days we had democracy, even though we didn't have democracy, consolidated democracy in 2010. But when you compare to today's context, I would say that we had democracy, and now that we don't have democracy. So it really depends, like, on the context and on what was happening in that moment. So it's hard to give like straightforward answers when you ask me this question.
Okay, coming back to Djindjic, the vice mayor of Belgrade, Goran Vesic, who was, if I remember correctly, a part also of Djindjic's cabinet, and who was also back then in the Democratic Party. Goran Vesic is now in the SNS party, the Serbian ruling party. He announced 3 years ago that the Djindjic monument will be built in Belgrade and will be placed somewhere in Belgrade to commemorate the work and life of Zoran Djindjic. Nothing has happened yet. How do you comment on that? Especially by also regarding how some high-level people in the Serbian government, even himself, Vučić, tend to openly admire Djindjic somehow. Isn't this a bit illogical? What do you think?
It is strange when you think of Vučić back in his nationalistic days with Šešelj and what Vučić was saying about Djindjic and what he said when Djindjic was killed. I don't want to repeat his words now here, but Vučić openly says that he has changed, and he is not afraid to say that. In that manner, he also admires Djindjic and Djindjic's policy, that he was right for many things. For me, the most important question is question of honesty. Is Vučić honestly think that Djindjic was a good guy, even though what Vučić said before about him? But I think that the thing is with the monument and with the whole narrative that Vučić creates about Djindjic is basically that Vučić wants to control all narratives in Serbia. So in the same time, you have the story about the monument for Slobodan Milošević, and that is story not led by Vučić, it's led by some people from Socialistic Party of Serbia, but that is in the media. On the other side, you have the story about monument for Djindjic. Also, in the same time, you have sometimes Vučić being nationalistic. You have people around him with very hate speech against our neighbors. And then Vučić comes and he says, "I am for peace and stability. I like Djindjic policy, etc." So I think that here the thing is that he just wants to control both narratives, narrative about Milošević and narrative about Djindjic. And he's doing that very good, I would say.
Having in mind that probably many people in Serbia still today admire Djindjic and somehow feel nostalgic when Djindjic as a topic comes up, and having also people on the other side who feel the same for Slobodan Milošević, is this maybe the explanation why Vučić wants to control both of those narratives? Because he knows that there is a loyal base of people still in Serbia who are loyal to Djindjic's policies and other people who are loyal to Slobodan Milošević's policies.
I would say that may be one of explanations for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Another thing which is really important, I would say, is when somebody criticizes the opposition in Serbia today, they tend to say often how the opposition in Serbia is only concentrated on Belgrade, which is the main city in Serbia and the capital of Serbia. They don't travel too much inside in Serbia to those villages, to other cities, to speak with people, to meet people, to tell them about their program plans and everything. When you look to Djindjic's campaign, which everybody can see also on YouTube, Djindjic's videos and meetings that he held in several cities in Serbia, can the opposition maybe take this as an example? Can they maybe return a bit? Can they maybe a bit focus on the way how Djindjic has done it and his party back 20 years from?
I would say no, they cannot. Not because they're not able to do that, but because they do not have a capacity for change. People do not trust them. They all have some background. They were in power. And for the last 9 years, since Vučić came to power, opposition leaders didn't gather higher support among citizens. If you look public polls, you will see that maybe even opposition has lower scores than they had maybe a few years ago. And I think that that we really have to pay attention to that details. We cannot speak about change or about campaign or what would be the right approach if you don't have the right people. And I know many of them, and I don't think anything bad about them, like personally. But I think it is a question of political responsibility. Is your responsibility that when you boycott elections or when citizens do not have like option to vote for or the leader to support, to stand behind him? If that is the situation, for example, you had protests last year, you had protests in last few years. In none of those protests, you couldn't see Serbian opposition politicians standing in the front lines or leading the protest, leading the street. They're always in the back. If you're in the back, then you have to move. Maybe there are no new people or new ideas at the moment. I think that will come. I think that my generation also has the great responsibility to make a change in Serbia. And when I say change, I do not mean like to change Vučić per se. I mean to change the way the system works, the way government rule here. Because if we just stick to change like these guys, pretty much the same would be afterwards. So I think that we always try to find like to see like can we learn from someone before, or can we learn from our neighbors in Montenegro or in Bosnia or North Macedonia? Yes, you can learn from them, but you need to know your context, to know what your possibilities are, to know, do people trust you, to read regularly public polls and not to say those public polls are not valid, those public polls are just paid by Vučić. Yeah, many of them are paid by Vučić, but there is no reason why someone would completely change the numbers. So I think that we need to speak here in Serbia about new policies, about new ideas, about new vision for Serbia, and how we see Serbia developing in next 5 or next 10 or next 15 years. Because I think it is not anymore the question like of changing the current government. It's about creating completely new environment where our kids will work, study, live tomorrow. And if we keep this system with these incentives that you have nowadays, that would be really bad. So I think that me, my colleagues, people from my and other generations, younger generations, will have a great role and responsibility for for developing some new ideas and policies that will one day lead to change. I don't know, would that happen in a year, 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years? But I really believe that it would happen.
Do we need a strong leader for this change? Someone who would look like or act like Djindjic, not 100% like him, but still in a way?
I think that leaders are very important in politics, even though now many try to oppose that story and to say we don't need leaders, we need to have like parties, but very like to have like good systems within parties. I think that leaders in politics are very important because leaders, political leaders, are those who promote some idea, who promote some vision, who promote some values. And the way people connect with those ideas, values, and vision is just via the leader. So if you connect with the leader, if the leader is talented for politics, if he or she is charismatic or have like a very good sense for people, then we can talk about some possibilities in that field.
But on the other hand, one can say when the leader is gone, the idea and everything of his values are also gone with him. So this is also a point. What would you say?
That may be true, but the thing that 18 years after Djindjic was killed, we are now talking also about him and his ideas, I think is the explanation why I think that when you have a good leader with good ideas, that those ideas will last, maybe not forever, but that those ideas would last for years and decades, even though maybe those ideas won't be like the most popular one, or that some new government won't protect those ideas, but I think that those ideas will continue to live even though there is no leader to promote them.
Okay, Vuk. Last but not least, what would you say? Hero or traitor for Djindjic? I possibly can assume your answer, but let me hear.
I would definitely say that he was a hero, and not only a hero. It's easy to say when someone is killed that he was a hero, but I would say that even though I was a kid, but in that time, but I know the stories from my parents, from my grandparents, other older people around me in those times and later. I think that he was hero when he was alive, before he was assassinated, and he was, for me, today he's still like a symbol of hope, the symbol of vision, but very clear vision how you see Serbia in the future, and he is the symbol of possibility to make a change. And I think that is something that we really need today, because people do not believe in change anymore. People are disappointed how previous changes happened and what happened after those changes. But I still think, I think that cases, for example, in Montenegro showed us that change is still possible. So that is the reason for me to believe that the change is possible, and I think that is also responsibility of younger generations to talk about Djindjic, to talk about Djindjic ideas, and to keep those ideas alive, and to create even some kind of myth about Djindjic, because I think that for every society is important to have good myths, myths that will strongly lead society in the future, and that myth will kind of protect the values that someone's values, and if we speak in this case, those values are Djindjic's values of modern, prosperous, democratic society that is part of Western European modern countries, and I believe that there is still space for Djindjic vision to happen in the coming years.
Let's hope so. Vuk, thank you very much for the interview. It was really nice talking to you. For our viewers, You can, if you're interested in the Western Balkans region and what the IIP is trying to do and how we are contributing to the Western Balkans and especially the Western Balkans Initiative group, you can look it up at iipvienna.com. This interview will be also there and on our YouTube channel, Facebook and Twitter. Nice talking to you, Vuk. Stay healthy, stay well, and I hope that we will talk again.
Thank you.